God, another week, another artistic history obsession of mine. I just hope I can hide my racism better this time. Hey there, good buddies. How are ya? Just a quick question, unrelated to anything. Are you white? You better be. But also, I'm not talking about Northern European whites. I'm asking if you're white, as in Southern European, which I guess more Latin than not white. Wait, am I being racist to myself? Today, we're talking about a dude. But not just any dude, a horny dude. We're talking about the life of the first emperor of Brazil, Pedro I. Yes, he was aggressively horny, fight me. My main source for this video, I think, mentioned he had around 20 something children, which is a lot. And also, my 20 something estimate could be wrong. Don't correct me though. My ego is through the fucking roof after having seen how many views I got from my last Reconquista video. But let's do it. Let's talk about Pedro I. But before we do, or let me just say to any Brazilians watching this, we had Pedro before you did. Pedro I he was born at the end of the 18th century in the palace of Carouge. He would go on to get the nickname of the Liberator and Soldier King. And don't worry, we will find out why. He had a Spanish mother, who, fun fact, was the nephew of her husband. But luckily, he did not get that chin. His mother, despite being married to the Portuguese king, still had ambitions of furthering her home country's power. And she tried to do that many times at the expense of Portugal, something which caused a rift in the young prince's family at a very early age. And the boy's parents would wind up splitting in 1802, and Pedro moved to the palace of Mafra, while his mother went to the Ramalhão palace. When he was a 9-year-old boy, Napoleon invaded, and the whole royal family fled to Brazil, and it's here where Pedro spent most of his life. Here, sort of. It's not actually on the map. He arrived in Rio de Janeiro after a 3-month-long voyage, where he, I'd wager, learned most of his skills as a navigator. His childhood spent in Brazil is what shaped him into being the man he grew up to be, in a sense. He loved his father dearly, to the point that he began to resent his mother for her infidelity towards his father, and also perceived humiliations of him. With his brother Miguel, as children, they would gather the sons of the slaves in the city and organize sort of mock military exercises. In secret, that is, as of course nobility couldn't be seen hanging around with those gross little icky bitch baby slaves. In a sense, however, it can be said that Pedro's childhood got better when he got to Brazil. He was able to roam around and play with other kids in secret. He hung out with soldiers and at taverns as he grew older. And yes, during the voyage, he'd spend a lot of time talking to the naval officers and also pretend he was a sailor. It was a lot more freedom than just the occasional walks to Mafra to visit his father. And again, one of the biggest influences on his childhood was the broken relationship between his parents and the fact he spent a lot of time with his grandmother, a clinically depressed woman who had lost her firstborn son and husband. He has been described as a poor student growing up, preferring instead to ride horses. That's right, he's a horse girl. He learned everything there was to learn about him, and given his adrenaline junkie nature, he allegedly fell from his horse about 36 different times. However, he began to suffer bouts of epilepsy at the age of 13, and throughout his early life, it is recorded that he suffered from 6 massive bouts, one of them even happening at a ceremony with his dad. In 1816, he was going to kiss his father, the king's hand, sort of swear fealty, I guess, where his face went into default mode and he fell flat on it, mumbling incoherently and foaming at the mouth. And again, here we see the massive contradiction that this monarch was. Physically, he was weak. I mean, constant bouts of epilepsy don't give the image of a strong royal. But he was undeniably a king of the people, and a fucking horn dog show-off. Apparently, whenever slaves were brought to the city, he'd catch a peek of whatever slave women were brought on board. You know, like a pervert. And he would also take dips in beaches, butt-ass naked. It's been reported that over the course of his life, he had up to 16 lovers. Bro must have been packing hard. His first romance met an untimely end, however. He began dating a French ballerina by the name of Noémie Thierry? Fuck me, that's a weird name. If you're French, I do not apologize. And Pedro knocked her up when his own family began trying to negotiate marrying him off to an Austrian girl, Maria Leopoldina. This obviously was not a very good look. His family wound up fulfilling Pedro's arranged marriage, and his French lover, which I'm not saying her name again, I'm just gonna mispronounce it, was forced to leave Rio de Janeiro and travel to Pernambuco. And his firstborn child was born a stillborn. One can only guess how the two reacted to this forced breakup. Pedro did what he could to make sure that she had a good life there, sending her plenty of gifts and money. It is a rumor, but one worth mentioning, that when the broken couple's child was born, he apparently had the child mummified and kept it with him. This child's body has never been found, and I personally don't think the mummification is true, but it tells us a fair bit of deal about Dom Pedro. Well, it's information already delivered by the opening phrase in this video that you're watching, but it confirms it nonetheless. A loving father and profoundly romantic. Pedro loved unpronounceable Frenchy, and he loved this child. But duty calls. Oh, but don't you worry. When he married Leopoldina, he did cheat around behind her back, trading many a rude letters with his new lover, Dumitria de Castro. They shared such romantic letters and phrases, such as when Dumitria asked Pedro how his thing was. Thing, of course, referring to his, I've given up hope for this video's continued existence. Penis. Again, this kinda shows his Pedro's duality mentioned in the opening of the video. He was completely unfaithful to his wife, who apparently did fall in love with him. He apparently wrote to Dumitria, yesterday I made love of matrimony, so today I can make our love of devotion. Despite him constantly banging someone else, reportedly the married couple got along well at first, with his wife writing in her letters back home, "Though we've been married only 2 days, he deserves all my respect and attention, for his behavior is admirable." Their bond would grow closer, however, with the birth of their first child, Maria de Gloria. The couple would go on to have 7 children together. However, Leopoldina would be left traumatized by how violent and dangerous births were back in the day. By which I mean, yeah, have you seen medicine back in the day? Worse yet, when it's medicine that has to be applied to a woman. Doctor, please. The baby is here, thank God. But my wife, she's dying, she's hemorrhaging. What can we do? Maybe I can stab it with a fork? Oh, that's a great idea. Leopoldina would grow to become terrified of the doctors, and giving birth to Januaria, their second child together. Pedro, somehow, being a decent man, took the doctors away, and his wife gave birth standing up, with Dom Pedro helping her stay on her feet. And reportedly, for the next 5 kids, he'd never leave her side. When he'd go on trips to see his side piece or to rule, he'd write letters home, asking how the children are, and even also get them vaccinated. You know, to get them chips implanted in their brains by ancient Bill Gates. I don't know what would be the 19th century version of him, but whatever. Joke's over, you better have laughed. Yeah, it's time to talk about his side piece, Dumituria de Castro. We don't know when they met exactly, but the famous Ipiranga shout of 1822, he was already boinking her and in love. This relationship not only caused the end of his happy marriage, although they did stay married. What the fuck are personal freedoms? And this affair would give Pedro not 1, not 2, not 4, but 5 bastard children. The two lovers shared hundreds of passionate letters, both romantic and both horny. It was sexting, but before your family was even around. They exchanged such romantic lines as, "Honey, I'm not giving you my heart, as it's already yours." Or, "Come." That's not an editing error. If I said what he said, this video would be taken down. But if you want, you can go on Pornhub and listen to the actors talk dirty to each other, and that's about the same kind of dirty talk these two had for each other. So big was the infatuation from the now emperor, he publicly acknowledged one of his bastard children. He brought Dumituria into court and gave her a job. What? There are letters from the actual Empress of Brazil, Leopoldina, complaining that she couldn't appoint bishops or rule as an empress does, but Dumituria could and did. Obviously, the marriage of the two royals fell apart with this whole business. Dumituria was made the first Viscount. Then she was made the Marquise of the Saints. Full recognition for all the bastard children, and also the children being brought to court. While traveling to Bahia one time, he took his court and his married wife, and Dumituria. His wife died at the end of 1826. I can't imagine the fucking toll constantly being humiliated took on her. We don't know how she died exactly. Some say she was murdered by Pedro. Pretty easy to see a reason why, but I don't think that's really his deal. A man over the course of 7 years doesn't go from a devoted father and husband with a habit of sleeping around to slowly and meticulously poisoning his wife or actually straight up killing her. Same for Dumituria the mistress. I think, although I can't corroborate this with anything, it's just an angry lunatic's opinion that the constant humiliation that she's suffered at the hands of her husband, along with, the constant emotional neglect, threw her into a depression that she couldn't get out of. And eventually, her health plummeted, and she died because of it. There was no aggression. Examinations of the emperor's remains show no bone fracture or any signs of injury. She was 29 years old and pregnant. Dom Pedro was almost definitely to blame for her death, though. He did not love her when they met. He was in love with that French dancer who got pushed away from court when he married her. And yes, he was a good husband to her, and was still a good father. He, however, lost all sight of it when he met Domitilla. Her death also most definitely put a strain on his relationship with Domitilla, perhaps putting his actions under new light. There are reports that Domitilla caught him crying while staring at a portrait of his deceased wife. Now, facing a plummeting popularity and a deeply unpopular court member, Domitilla, Pedro had to do something, as his sex scandal was known all the way back in Europe, and many people even refused his offers of marriage, obviously, but he did eventually remarry to Amelia, a French Bavarian noblewoman, and he pushed Domitilla away from court, writing to her, "I love you, but I love my reputation even more." Apparently, he also threatened her, telling her to leave by June of 26. He never forgot his wife, however. Before even his remarriage, he tried comforting his children, telling his son, "Poor boy, you are the saddest prince of the world." Amelia herself was reportedly a kind woman, getting along well with his children, and, in a sense, bringing normalcy back to a broken family. By this point in time, besides the fact that his brain was constantly in his pants, and despite what he would claim, he had become an insanely well-read and cultured individual, reading the works of many philosophers, particularly liberal ones, and it's from those readings he became an abolitionist, decrying slavery and beginning work to end it in Brazil. And his rule as emperor reflected his liberal ideas. He cut the amount of money the royal family had, cut taxes that hindered the agricultural sector, and there was freedom of religion and freedom to own property. But then a thing happened. His dad died, and he never named a new heir for Portugal, which meant that the crown passed straight to him, the Emperor of Brazil. Now, I already did a whole video on why that was bad, so to sum it up, Pedro didn't want it, so he gave the crown to his oldest daughter, Maria da Glória. Neither his daughter's rule or his own were to last, however, as increasing unpopularity at home and an absolutist coup in Portugal meant his attention was now completely divided. People were still angry at him about the whole Domitilla thing, and the fact that despite Brazil being a liberal nation and a constitutional monarchy, Pedro just couldn't help but meddle in the nation's affairs. Hence the whole libertarian and thought autocratic behavior thing he's got going. With the country turning against him, he abdicated, writing, "I prefer to step down the throne with honor rather than rule in dishonor." He moved to Paris with his wife, where he met his exiled daughter, who was in tears to see him. While in Paris and in trips he took around West Europe before returning to Portugal, he wrote often to his children, saying how dearly he missed them, and urging them to take their education seriously and be a bunch of nerds. After gathering up an army of volunteers and mercenaries, he left Paris and ended next in the Azores, not pictured on this map. The Azores was the only bit of land which had sided with Maria da Glória, the Portuguese queen, after the coup, and from the Azores he landed at Porto, the city where he would be trapped in for an entire year. A war started for love, a war led by a devoted father, and a devoted father who was killed by the love he had for his daughter. Pedro landed with his forces unopposed in the city, as it was believed that Porto would welcome the army better than any other port in the country. And in a sense, they were right, as Porto was one of the few places who had sided with Maria when she was ousted. But of course, Miguel, Pedro's brother, crushed whatever resistance was to be found here. However, the absolutist garrison had vacated the city, as they didn't know how big the liberal army was. And, fun fact, it was fucking tiny, about 12,000 soldiers. But a siege began almost immediately after Pedro occupied Porto, and a few days later, on the 18th of July, the first engagement took place. It took 5 whole days. I'm not gonna give you a recounting of the whole siege. Again, this isn't a Siege of Porto video, it's a Life of Dom Pedro video, but reading about this siege was fucking harrowing. If you, my dear viewer, go around Portugal and ask them to tell you a noteworthy event about this city, they all will tell you, and for good reason, about the siege of Porto during the Portuguese Civil War. The city was bombarded, fighting waged all around it for a whole damn year, and Pedro himself fought and ate amongst the rank-and-file soldiers. He built trenches, shot the cannons, tended to the wounded. As a child, he admired Napoleon and his feats, and here we can see some behaviors he likely emulated from Napoleon, such as generally fighting with the soldiers, in complete contrast to his brother, Dom Miguel, who led the war effort like a typical absolutist, far behind the front lines. His time in the siege is when his sort of heroic Portuguese image is built, and in a sense when his personal troubles were at their worst. We'll talk about how in a bit his health plummeted here, but back home things weren't so good. His daughter, Paula, died, and a host of Brazilian conspirators showed up at his doorstep. Hey, buddy. So, how's it hanging? What do you want? So, I was wondering, what if maybe you came back home? We kinda miss you? Dude, can't you see what the hell's going on here? I mean, yeah, but you know Brazil's in danger. The people all need you back. Oh, really? Who's the people? Oh, it's you two and your party, isn't it? I mean, technically, isn't the whole country the party? A bunch of conspirators showed up, asking him to return. Pedro in turn made a bunch of demands to his return. That being that the constitution he made would allow it, it didn't, and that the vast majority of the population wanted him back. They sorta didn't. During the siege, Pedro saw the diseases spread amongst his soldiers, and the odds start to turn against him. So he took a gamble. He split his forces, sending half of them down to Algarve to take Miguel's attention away from the siege. And this gamble worked. The Algarve and most of the Alentejo fell to liberal forces, and an ally of Pedro, who gathered a second army and fleet of volunteers in England, conquered Lisbon, the capital of the country. Increasingly desperate, Miguel ordered a final attack on the city, led by his marshal, Bourmont, which failed. Miguel, Pedro's brother, would be defeated at Aceira. Not even a Spanish intervention saved Miguel, who then retreated to Evramont, where a peace treaty between him and a now severely ill Pedro was signed. Maria II, the daughter of Pedro, returned from her exile and began ruling as queen, while Miguel himself went into exile to Genoa, where he later would decry the Evramont Peace Treaty as being signed under duress and therefore illegitimate. But there was nothing he could do. Liberalism was back. Pedro himself, mortally ill with tuberculosis and now residing at the Palace of Carouge, wrote an open letter to the nation of Brazil itself, imploring the country to abolish slavery. He wrote, "Slavery is an evil and an attack on the rights and dignities of the human species. Yet its consequences are less harmful for those who suffer in captivity than it is to the nation whose laws permit it. It is a cancer eating away at our morality." As he came to the realization that his life was ending and he started coughing up blood in the very room that he was born in, that dramatic ass bitch, he reportedly asked to see a soldier who he fought with during the siege, a man by the name of Manuel Pereira, whom he thanked for his heroic service to the country, and they likely shared some war stories. Pedro passed away on the 24th of September 1834 at 2:30 p.m., just days away from his 36th birthday. His wife stood by him till the very end. Pedro was born a prince, not an heir, just a prince. He rose to be an emperor and he gave it up, as he realized that the people no longer wanted him. As a duke, he went to Portugal to fight for his daughter's right. Pedro is a figure that deserves respect. He was flawed, yes, like the best amongst us. Despite fighting for a liberal Brazil, he couldn't help but meddle in the country's affairs like an autocrat would. He relentlessly cheated on and humiliated his wife to the point it most likely drove her to death, and yet he was an intensely devoted father who did love both Leopoldina and Amelia. He is one of the most complex and fascinating figures that Brazil and Portugal share. A good man behaving indecently at an era that was trying to be decent, and he embodies that effort to overcome one's flaws and be better than you were. At his request, his heart was buried in the Porto Cathedral. I can't really remember its name. And to this day, the heart is still in Porto. His body itself, in 1927, was taken back to Brazil and buried alongside his two wives. Bonifacio, I've mentioned him before in my Brazilian War of Independence video. Don't ask me to say his first name. He wrote to Pedro's children after news of his death spread. "Pedro isn't dead. Ordinary men die, not heroes." His son had taken the throne after him, a son deeply affected by his father's decisions. His mother's early death and his father leaving him when he was 5 years old. Again, Pedro's flaws keep popping up. He left behind a deeply traumatized child who grew up to resent the throne he was occupying. Maybe because he also blamed the establishment for taking his father to some far-off land. But his resentment of the crown led to Pedro II not acting when a military coup ousted him. He was done with the whole thing. And this video is also done. Pedro should be considered a hero. He founded the nation of Brazil, and he built many of the liberal institutions in Portugal. He fought with his men, and he spent time in the awful conditions which later took his life. I really do think that the best way to describe him is a deeply flawed man who tried to do good, and he fought for good. And that is a beautiful thing. Thanks for watching.